So if you're coming from a standard surface design space, these patterns with non-rotational symmetries are actually the ones you'll start with. But in the world of origami tessellations, these patterns are actually harder to find the constructions that fulfill them than the rotationally symmetric ones with the hexagonal, triangular, square, rectangular, or columnar symmetries. So today we're talking about tessellations and their crease patterns, how to draw them, that have no rotational symmetry, so no global rotational symmetry. And there's two ways to do this. You can either have none of the twists be inherently rotationally symmetric, and then also have them arranged in a way that is not rotationally symmetric. Or you can have an arrangement of twists that could potentially have rotational symmetry, but because of the spacing between things, there isn't actually that symmetry there. So the one I have on screen right now is an example of the first case, where I'm using these trapezoid twists, and here I have an open, with my mouse going on it, an open trapezoid and a closed trapezoid, and they are alternating. So all of the neighbors, all of the twists on the opposite side of a pleat of the open trapezoid are closed trapezoids, and all of the neighbors of the closed trapezoid are open trapezoids. And this is one of those structures where both the structure and the twists mandates that you have no rotational symmetry. So let's take a look at the tiling. So secretly, this is a bit of a design lesson as well. And basically, in order to know how to draw things in Inkscape, you need to know what things you're putting together and in what structure. So looking at these two tilings, the one with the alternating trapezoids is basically you take a hexagon tiling and you slice it thinner in one direction. In this case, I have vertical slices. And there are several affordances with this option where I can say, okay, I want to have things alternating. I want to have things mirrored. I want to have a more complicated way of mirrored. And there's all kinds of different options. So anywhere I have a tiling break, one of these lines that goes straight through the tiling, I have the same thing in opposite twist-handedness on either side. That's what the white and the red are for. Red is for right-handed, white is for left-handed twists. I can mirror along that line. And then getting into it, one of the things that I figured out when I was preparing for this video is that you don't have to mirror on every line. You can have alternation within a column and then mirror between columns. So there's another little fun tidbit there. And let's actually take a look at how to construct one of those patterns. So first, let's take a look at our template. So I'm looking for the triangle blocks, not advanced, but tri blocks, which you can get access to through the link in the description. And this has all of my trapezoid twists that I need. And notice that there's this pair of front and back trapezoids, open trapezoids. That's something that we can use on its own to create a tessellation. So I'm going to copy that and bring up a new file, CP, and I'm going to go with CP triangle instead of try-on square for this particular case, since it's so similar to something that would have hexagonal symmetry. And I'm going to paste those two hexagons that I copied in the middle. or sorry, 2 trapezoids. And I can't center them exactly unless I add some extra space between them. So I'll ungroup, add some extra space, extend those lines to meet. And I'm going to center that on those thicker grid lines that are showing me where the center of the page is. And we're going to take this and we're going to find out how to copy it around with what spacing to get more repeats. So I'll duplicate the 2 of those and copy it out up here. And from there I can solve for where the next copy needs to go. And if I'm happy with that spacing, I can leave it with that and adjust the length of those pleats. Or I can say, you know, this is a lot of space between those that first pair. I'm going to shorten that distance instead, make that 3 grid spacings from mountain to mountain instead of 4. And so what I'm going to do there is edit this pleat, and I'm going to make sure to do it on the other copy as well. And stick that in place and duplicate, and coming down here, now I see there's a bit of an overlap, so I will edit this one and likewise the other copies, because I'm not sure yet which one I'm going to keep. And I also noticed that there was a gap with these other pleats, other direction of pleats. So really what we're trying to do here is make sure that on all 4 pleats of my trapezoid on the back, I have the appropriate length of pleats to match with my trapezoid on the front. So now if I were going to make another copy and drag this over here, that's going to match exactly up. So the repeating unit, when I have this alternation of trapezoids, is the 2 trapezoids with their pleats adjusted to be the correct distances. So if I have that grouped, and I'm going to go ahead and get rid of those upper 2 that were helping out, I can duplicate those groups and connect all the way across the page. And there's really only one way to connect, because there's only one pleat in that orientation to connect up. We want to make sure we're staying in a straight line as we draw across. And then I can select all, duplicate, and because I checked in advance, these are going to line up. So if I hadn't checked before, I would need to be doing a lot of moving of pleats, like moving of how far those pleats are going right now. But as it is, I can just snap on. And this doesn't really, so this process of setting up the crease pattern is somewhat related to how you would fold the tessellation, but I would actually recommend a different column for the folding order. So the column I would recommend with the folding order is the one that has the double depth pleats sticking out. So between these pairs of twist is a double depth pleat. There's 2 spaces from valley to parallel mountain. And I would do a column in the opposite sense of what we just did with drawing the crease pattern, to fold and then add the next column to resolve those double depth, or in this side single depth pleats. And that way you can come out and not have a bunch of pleat overlaps when you're ready to start a new column. So that was alternating trapezoids without mirroring. But what about with mirroring? What if we said, and I'm going to use these same twists, so I'm going to get rid of all but these two. What if we wanted to have this kind of setup and then mirror it? What would be the requirements there? Well, for one thing, we need to be clear on what we're mirroring over. And this particular arrangement doesn't show that very well. So I'm going to ungroup and then show just that column that I was talking about earlier. And in order to get the mirroring, what I need is for the tip of one repeat of my trapezoid to line up with the tip of the other. And this is going to be challenging. So it needs to be along this line, which is perpendicular to the pleat coming out of that tip. I'll zoom in a bit for you. And the things that I can change are the spacings between twists on these pleats. So one thing I can do is move this one closer. So I'll closer to the twist on the back. I'll shorten that and also remember to shorten it on the copy. But that tip is still way far out from this line. So the only other thing I can change is how far away the twist on the back is from this twist on the front. And this is a lot of space. So now if I extend this line, I can see those tips are lining up. I could do mirror symmetry here. And in order to make that happen, I'm going to need to bring this pleat all the way out here. The next thing to think about is when we're looking at these mirror symmetries, we want to bring all of the pleats that are going to cross this mirror symmetry boundary up to the mirror symmetry line. And we want to do that on both sides. So we can bring this then to the tip of the twist on the back and do the same thing. And you might be thinking, well, this isn't something I would like to fold. It's going to use way too much grid. And that's fine. But this is an exercise in how do we get these kinds of structures? And what I'm going to do with this particular one, I'm actually going to open up a different crease pattern template, the triangle on square template, because with the mirror symmetry, it's going to much better match this template instead of the hexagon one. And I'm going to select all and copy and paste. And I'm going to rotate this so that my mirror symmetry line is horizontal. So I'm going into the transform menu, rotate, and that's going to be 60 degrees. And I want to make sure that I'm not applying this to each object separately, that I'm applying it to everything at once. And I can choose what I want to put in the center. And I'm going to go ahead and put my initial, or I'm going to put the tip of one of my trapezoids right in the center. Now, there's one pleat that I extended on one of these trapezoids on the front that I did not extend on the one on the other one. So I'm going to delete the second one. And this is going to be what I duplicate and mirror over the horizontal. Notice how those pleats are all lining up. And then take all of that, group it, duplicate to get my new repeats. And that's going to match up because we made sure to adjust the pleats on both of our trapezoids on the front, and we deleted the one that we didn't adjust. So again, we've got these two trapezoids and spacing between them, and we're hitting these mirror symmetry boundaries that we're then able to copy over. And now you can see on the top and the bottom of what I've drawn, those pleats are lining up exactly. The mountains are matching with mountains, the valleys are matching with valleys, so I can duplicate this whole thing and copy it on up. Or down, as I so choose. And one of the cool things about these crease pattern templates is if I select all and group and come over to the layers menu and bring up the mask layer, I can duplicate the mask layer, select the pattern, and then hold down Shift and also select the duplicated mask, and then go Object, Clip, Set. And you might have seen I have a keyboard shortcut that I set up for that. And that means that I don't have to worry about erasing things at the boundaries. I just snap it away with the mask. So this is also in that trapezoids structure that we saw earlier. There's another structure that also guarantees that you won't have rotational symmetry, which is this split hexagons and triangles twofold structure. So just like the trapezoid structure, I think about this structure as a structure of hexagons that has been subdivided. And again, we have these vertical lines that can be treated as mirror symmetry lines. And then I also want to talk about another group of tilings that on the face of it might seem to be rotationally symmetric in and of themselves. So in these tilings, each rhombus is acting as a position of twofold rotational symmetry. But that's not necessarily true when you go to the tessellation itself. So you can have these structures that have the potential for rotational symmetry. So this column is a repeating structure that can pivot around the center of the rhombus. The triangles are definitely not in positions of rotational symmetry. There's a different thing on all three sides. Even though these two rhombuses are the same rhombus on either side of this triangle, they're in different orientations relative to the triangle. And then the third side is another triangle. And yeah, Nancy, you're exactly right about interlocking hearts being a good allegory for that other tessellation that we just designed together, because we have the mirror symmetry lines. In order to get that alignment, we need to have some extra space generally between twists, especially if they're on opposite sides. So we can take a look at one of these tilings. I will say I've only designed one tessellation each in each of these two. And let's see what we find. We might find that we're able to mirror the columns. We might find that we're not. In these particular cases, I was able to mirror the columns, but it's not necessarily guaranteed. So let's go with the slightly simpler case where we have this rhombus, triangle, rhombus, triangle, rhombus, triangle repetition set up, and see if we can get that in a columnar setting where we can have that mirrored. So I'm going to arbitrarily choose options that I've never used before. So I'm going to go for a right-handed rhombus and a left-handed triangle. I'm going to choose them on opposite sides of the paper. Again, I have not tested this. And I'm going to bring this up in our triangle on square tiling. And we're going to see what happens. So I've got my rhombus and I've got my triangle. And one of the things that I want to do is make a column. So the first thing that I want to do is actually make sure that I'm conforming to the tiling. And how can I check that? Well, I can come back here and I can say, in this tiling, every other triangle is in the opposite orientation, and all pleats that leave the column are headed in the same direction. Every other rhombus is in the opposite orientation too. So my repeating unit inside the column is triangle, rhombus, triangle, rhombus, where I have basically triangle pointing left, rhombus, diagonal up and right, triangle pointing right, rhombus, diagonal up and left. And so we're going to need 2 copies of each of these twists. And we're going to need to rotate. And it's easy to find a second rotation of the triangle. A little bit harder to find the proper second rotation of the rhombus. So if I tried to connect in this orientation, I notice that, so I've got pleats going out in certain directions, and this does not conform with those directions. This is trying to make a connection up where it should be going out. So I can rotate again. And now that connection is going out in the proper orientation. So from here, I want to make a copy of that rhombus and stick it up at the top, because that's what's going to tell me if I've got my orientation right for mirroring. And I'm going to go ahead and duplicate all of that and rotate so that the pleats leaving the column are going vertically. So I can bring everything up to a horizontal line. So I want, at the end of this process, this leftmost tip of the rhombus to be up at that line. So how can I make that happen? Well, I can tighten, for starters, everything that has to do with twists coming, with the pleats going down, and I can elongate everything that has to do with twists, with pleats going up. I'm going to need to elongate that far. Okay, that seems pretty reasonable. Now this is a lot of spacing, so it's not necessarily something that I would want to fold for myself, but this technique, when you use it on all of the different options of open and closed rhombus, open and closed triangle on the same or on the opposite side, And I'm going to go ahead and say if you use the triangle and rhombus on the same side, you're going to get less of this spacing in between. You're going to come up with options that are appealing to you. So yeah, if you didn't know already, this is secretly a design workshop. And now I'm going to go in and clean up my pleats that are overlapping. So I'm going to bring this down and make sure it actually lands on the grid. And I can shorten these pleats and shorten these pleats. And even from right here, I can tell you that there's not going to be any positions of rotational symmetry in this tessellation. And that's because we have each of our rhombuses with different distances on different sides. So this rhombus has the same distance to the triangle on either side, sure, but those triangles then have different distances to the next rhombus. So this one has 2, 4, 5 spaces of mountain. This one has 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. So we're going to be seeing different results here. One other constraint that I had is that the triangle here on the back cannot have its central triangle go past that horizontal line that I'm intending to mirror across. So coming in here, I'm going to shorten these pleats. And elongate this one. And here again, I need to shorten the pleats that go above the intended mirror symmetry line and elongate the pleats that are below. And since I made sure when I was doing my edits of these empty gaps between things that those edits were in the triangles and not the pleats from the rhombus, I can go ahead at this point and get rid of my duplicate rhombus. So I can go ahead and shorten these guys, and just so you have the same snapping settings, I'm snapping to path intersections and cusp nodes and grids. I wouldn't necessarily need to snap to page borders. That's something that generally will not be what you want to do in these crease patterns. And so now I have one of the mirror symmetry lines set up, and I also need to do the other. Now I can't have it at the other tip of the rhombus or the tip of the rhombus that's more horizontal. I need to bring it all the way down to the tip of the triangle, and then start editing my pleats from there. And I could freely have this mirror symmetry line further out from the twists as well. That's not going to make a difference in the end result. So getting rid of my guideline for those mirror symmetries, I can now select all, and I'm going to go ahead and group it. Duplicate first before I mirror over the horizontal, and just make sure that everything is lining up. And then I can decide at this point, what do I want to be centered? Do I want it to be, select all, do I want it to be the tips of these two rhombuses? Do I want it to be the tips of these two triangles? Do I want it to be the space in the middle of this tube pleat? There's a lot of options. I'm just going to go with that one arbitrarily, and I can duplicate and copy to my heart's content. And again, since we have both the upper and the lower excuse me, mirrored copy, I can then select all and duplicate and have the whole thing come out nicely. The one thing that I would recommend in terms of where you're going to put the center is do put the center of the crease pattern on the mirror symmetry line. So now we have our full expression of the crease pattern that fits on the grid template, and I can group, bring up the mask, duplicate the mask, select the pattern, select the mask, and I'm using my keyboard shortcut of Shift-C to make that clip. So that's really what's going on with these non-rotationally symmetric kinds of things. We're looking for what are these structures of twists that we can then fill in, either a structure that guarantees that we're not going to have rotational symmetry, and we have the option of mirroring or not mirroring, or a structure that leaves it more open-ended, and we have more options of maybe we could find an option that has rotational symmetry. Maybe we don't. Maybe we start combining aspects of these different tilings. So the difference between these two is how many triangles are in between these chevron stripes of rhombi. And that also determines the orientation of the chevron stripe in the particular column. So there's a lot of potential options to dig through in each of these structures. And I invite you to go have fun with it, to try some of these out for yourself. And yeah, exactly. Like Nancy said in the comments, this is what we work through in tessellations by tiles, focusing in on one of these structures at a time. The trapezoid structure is one of the ones that we covered, and seeing, okay, what are the affordances in this tiling? What kinds of tessellations does it make? Are there any particular considerations for getting things that are nicer to fold or that look nicer in the end? So that's all from me today. Happy folding, everyone. Make sure to get your crease pattern templates if you haven't already in the link down below. And check out Tessellations by Tiles if you want to learn more about designing from this perspective. So happy folding, and I'll see you next week.